to talk about today about SSP, Safe and Sound Protocol. So that is something that you guys have seen in my previous post that I did for my 6-year-old son. We did it about 8 weeks ago, and we did it with Carol Ann under her guidance, and I found the experience amazing. Not just working with her, but also the technology itself, which is a very evidence-based, medically researched by Dr. Porges, Safe and Sound Protocol. He's actually, there are a few other lines under ILS, and SSP is one of them. So actually, it's a funny story. I came across Carol Ann in the neurofeedback community, and I was looking for a neurofeedback device to do for my son at home to help him with his attention and his focus. We've done neurofeedback before, and we liked what we saw with it. And I came across Carol Ann, who does neurofeedback as well. And she told me that a great place to start from would be the SSP, the Safe and Sound Protocol. So that's how I came to know. And after doing it 8 weeks prior to it, past it, I realized that this is a science not many people are talking about in the autism community, yet it is so relevant for our kids. Carol Ann does it for adults as well, so it's not just limited to kids. Adults can do it. Anyone with past history of trauma would benefit from it. And while I appreciate that not all kids on the autism spectrum would have trauma, but there are many things that are considered trauma in our kids' world, things that they can't even express to us that they have gone through. Like for me, I know that when I went to work, when my son was so young, I know his personality changed completely. And I remember telling you, Carol Ann, that I've always felt that that was a traumatic experience for him. And right around that time, the autism symptoms emerged as well. So I'll hand it over to Carol Ann to introduce herself, and then we'll go into some of the questions regarding SSP. I do have questions from the previous post as well, and you guys feel free to, comment on as we go along.
Okay. So hi, I'm Carol Ann Rowland. I am a clinical social worker, psychotherapist. I usually work predominantly with teens and adults, but as Batul has mentioned, I also offer neurofeedback. And once I started offering neurofeedback, I started interacting more with families with children on the spectrum. I also have quite a bit of experience with people on the spectrum within my own family. My ex-husband was later diagnosed towards the end of our marriage with Asperger's syndrome. And so both of my children have special needs. They are both adults now, so I'm in a different stage with that. But I have been practicing as a psychotherapist for 25 years, and I take a nervous system-based approach to psychotherapy, because part of my background is that I am a trauma specialist. And when you work with trauma, you end up... trauma for psychotherapy is kind of like the brain surgery of the therapy world. It's very, very complex. You're working with people with very acutely sensitive nervous systems, which is quite similar to working with people on the spectrum. So I became interested in looking for more effective things that will help to create a physiological shift to help my clients to feel better more quickly and not have to work so hard to feel okay. And so there was kind of a number of things that I found along the way. It eventually led me to neurofeedback. And it actually was 3 different clients who were renting neurofeedbacks from me for use at home asked me about SSP. And so when I kept hearing about SSP mostly from parents of kids on the spectrum, I thought, okay, I need to research this. And once I started reading about it, I was just blown away. And I ordered a system, I did the training first and then ordered a system right away. Used it on myself first and then started using it with my clients. And it's just been so remarkable. I see shifts with this system that in terms of psychotherapy with trauma would normally take decades to produce.
Oh, yeah. So there's a valid question over here, and I guess had the same question when I first approached SSP. How do you define what trauma is, and how do you know that our children have trauma? For my case, I had a suspicion about my son being affected when I went to work. He was so young. And in other cases, obviously, it's a little bit more obvious if kids have, witnessed domestic violence or, terribly been too traumatizing for them, or they've been
Yeah.
forced to do things that they don't want to do. But I'll let you expand on that.
Yeah. So what most people think of as being trauma are things like severe abuse, neglect, really big events like going through a fire or a severe car accident. Trauma therapists, how we see trauma is really anything that really overwhelms the ability to cope at the time. So sometimes it could be early medical interventions. Sometimes, I mean, really, honestly, what I think for people on the spectrum, day-to-day life can be traumatic. You know, if you go into a grocery store and you're bombarded with sounds and fluorescent lights and stimulation and people coming too close, that can be incorporated by the nervous system as being, or encoded by the nervous system as being a traumatic event.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a wide range. Like usually when we think of trauma as in terms of increasing someone's nervous system sensitivity, it's this kind of either very overwhelming experience or a very repeated bombardment of kind of too much stimulation, too much for that individual person.
Well, SSP has another portion which is very relevant, which worked great for us, which was the auditory processing aspect of things, right?
Yeah.
So can you expand a bit on that as well? Because I think that's something that our kids have a lot, like kids on the autism spectrum. We don't get a diagnosis for auditory processing because you have to be 7 years older to have that.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, when I was first training, even to be diagnosed as being on the spectrum, they wouldn't normally assess a child till they were 3 years old. Yeah. So that has changed a lot now. But yes, auditory processing. So you wanted me to speak about auditory processing disorder, or
how does SSP relate to that or improve that? Yeah.
I actually think that SSP originally was created for auditory processing disorder. That is a kind of, I'm pretty sure I remember reading that at some point.
Yeah, Dr. Purvis, yeah.
Yeah, and then they found it's also good for other things, including anxiety, depression, trauma, autism spectrum disorders. Part of how it works, both with trauma and with auditory processing disorder, is to help retrain the middle ear and the amygdala to stop hyperfocusing on low frequency sounds, which are the sounds of danger, like crash, boom, bang. Yeah. People with very sensitive nervous systems or people who went through trauma, their amygdala is constantly scanning for danger and paying too much attention to low frequency sounds and not enough attention to high frequency sounds, which is the sound of human speech. So part of what SSP does is it supports the middle ear and the brain and the nervous system in being able to attend more to higher frequency sounds. And so that's where we start to see improvements with things like sound sensitivity, startle reflex, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, especially with our kids, I think in the autism world, we talk a lot about stimulating the vagus nerve because we know a lot of our fight and flight responses are coming out of that. And kids on the spectrum, they're frozen up out of fear and out of, just not being able to comprehend what's going to happen in their life next. So they're always stuck in that mode where they're scanning for, like what you said, danger. Not probably what's happening in their world, but it is what's happening to them. It's how they're processing it.
Yeah, and how they're perceiving it. So for a child on the spectrum, if they go somewhere, say it's just a family gathering and people are laughing and people may be having a good time, that is not how they may be experiencing it. They're experiencing loud and overwhelming and competing sounds, and they feel in danger. So the nice thing about SSP is that when the improvements show up, it's almost as if by magic. So people will talk about how they just didn't even notice the thing that used to really trigger them.
Well, one thing that I noticed right off the bat with my son was my shoes are gone. Can you ask Daddy to help you with that? Sorry.
That's okay.
Maybe ask Daddy to help you with that. Well, exactly. One of these things is what I noticed with my son was that he was able to ask questions. My son has always struggled in putting together a sentence with spontaneous language. It's not that he doesn't have the language. Over the years, we've added to his language bank heaps, and he's had heaps of speech therapies and behavior therapies as well. But he still struggled to put together a sentence. He always pointed to the executive functioning side of things.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think about what you want to say, then you have to put it in a sentence, and then you have to project it.
Yeah.
But he is catching on so fluently, and he just puts his hand up very neurotypically. He asks the question, fires it away, and it really just in and out. Eye contact's great, and all those things. So that bit is very much it's coming together like building blocks. Like
Absolutely.
it's just building up now.
And how long did it take for that to show up?
The eye contact turned up from the first session, even though we did like 10 minutes. But the responsiveness, I was just blown away. It was more the responsiveness. It's not like, and I wrote in my post, I'm like, it's not that he's a new person, that, some people go like, oh, I can't recognize my child anymore. It's not that. It's He used to be 20% of him before, and now he's more like 60 to 75%. There's a personality, there's fullness of opinions, and he's ridiculously happy. He's so happy.
Yeah. That's what I actually tell people occasionally, because I often work with people with very extreme anxiety. Sometimes people will say that they're afraid they won't be themselves anymore. Mm-hmm. And what I tell people is, no, you'll be more of who you are. Because the anxiety and the fear and the sound sensitivity, that's not who you are. That's the stuff that's getting in the way. And even as you said that, I was starting to tear up a little bit, and I can tell you that almost every single person I've used with this with, I have seen improvements to the point that at some point I have started to cry, because I just can't believe the difference. It's just so inherently rewarding, this work.
It's like they have been, stuck in a vortex where they're not able to kind of express themselves as fully and with as much confidence as they need to. And so they're kind of hanging back and being hesitant. And my son is coming around so much quicker and faster. And he's able to ask, I think for the first time, he asked me a why question all by himself today. I'm not even prepared for it, because I'm thinking, I'm going to need to go through another at least 10 hours of speech therapy before I can start touching on the why question.
Exactly. Yeah.
There he is. He's spontaneously firing things off at me.
Yeah, it's just like magic. He didn't have to do the 10 hours, and he may still need speech therapy, but
you're just moving the milestone forward, right?
Yeah. Once the physiology shifts, whether it's due to anxiety or trauma or auditory processing disorder or autism spectrum disorder, once that physiology shifts, the changes just show up in an effortless way.
Yeah. I know, and I have you to thank for that, because you really held our hands through the process. Now, there's another question over here, which is also fun, about what's the difference between SSP and neurofeedback?
Yeah. So SSP is a 5-hour auditory intervention. It involves music. Say with a small child who doesn't have trauma and probably isn't on the spectrum, might be. Every brain is different, so we never know for sure how any one person will respond. But if everything is simple and effortless, it's listening to 1 hour per day, 5 days in a row, and then they're done, the whole protocol. SSP works by the music has been specially filtered so that as you are listening, the muscles of the middle ear have to work really hard. And as those muscles become fatigued, there is a ripple effect that goes through most of the body, because there are nerves that extend from the middle ear to the vagus nerve and different aspects of the social engagement systems, like the heart, the throat, the larynx, the pharynx, the digestive system. And what's that?
Just by listening to music.
Yeah, just by listening to music. And there's this ripple effect that occurs through the system, and physiology shifts very rapidly. With neurofeedback, now the system that I have, most of the feedback does come through music, but it's a different approach. There are 5 sensors that are worn. There are 2 on the scalp, 2 at the top of the ears, and 1 on the bottom of the right ear. And with the neurofeedback system, there are different types of neurofeedback. The system that I use, the feedback is coming through music that plays through the tablet. My system does not send any frequencies to the brain, so there's less risk of side effects. But what happens is The sensors sense brain activity, and they sense when the brain is about to shift from one state to another. Every time that happens, there will be a little skip in the music where the sound cuts out for a moment.
Yeah.
And because that pattern happens over and over again, the brain starts to recognize it's being given feedback about itself. And it's kind of like if you or I were doing yoga in front of a mirror when we've never had a mirror in front of us before. We say, oh, wait, my form's a little bit off. And it gives the brain a chance to course correct. So what's tricky is that both SSP and neurofeedback may be very useful for any one individual. What I find, SSP is typically the best place to start most of the time, because it shifts physiology very rapidly. It sets a better platform for neurofeedback and for almost anything else you access to work more effectively and more efficiently. Now, SSP is good for very specific concerns, although they are concerns that most people have some degree of issue with, but it may or may not be relevant for every single person, whereas neurofeedback is good for anyone at all. Anyone who has a brain is what the company says. Neurofeedback tends to start out more subtly and gradually. It tends to be, for most people, it's very relaxing. And what's tricky is for SSP, for some people, is very relaxing, and for some people, it's activating, and for most people, it's some of both.
So it's individualized to every brain, right?
It is individualized through every brain, and both of them are, and that's what's tricky, where it becomes difficult to explain when we do which, or how we approach either, or what the process will look like, because it's different from one person than another. Generally speaking, while a few people have a very dramatic response just to one or a few sessions of neurofeedback, it's more the exception than the norm. The norm with neurofeedback is it starts out slowly and gradually and then accumulates over time. Whereas with SSP, what I find is a subtle response is not the norm, and a dramatic response is more.
Response is usually what happens. But the success stories of the other parents who have gone through SSP as well. And just to answer one of the other questions that turned up just now is, how do you get a kid on the spectrum to sit for so long? And that's a very valid question. It's not just for SSP. That question is to the parent. That question is for anything. How do you get your child to sit to do homework or to do anything else? With SSP, there are ways you can build up to it. So we've traveled a fair bit with our son. So we're in the habit of getting headphones on during the plane service, because you can't have them using their iPad speakers, and obviously you're going to need to go in with some kind of entertainment. So he had prior experiences to wearing the headsets, and it's a child-size headset that comes with an SSP device. So yes, you wouldn't particularly start. I mean, the great thing about working with Carol Ann or an experienced SSP provider is that even though it's a 5-day, 5-hour program, you can do it over a couple of days. Carol Ann provides this equipment for about 10 days. So you can take twice as long. Yeah. We started with 10 minutes. I think not even. I think I did 7 minutes in the first day. I didn't even make it to the 15 to the 30-minute mark because I just wanted to see what happens. And there was nothing agitating that took place. So I went from 7 minutes to 10, 10 to 15. And then slowly took my way up to an hour. We still finished it in 8 days because we caught up on time. But you still have all that time to utilize it. How you can save yourself some time is by ordering yourself a child-based headset. And then just playing with it. Just do something that's fun with it. Have him listen to his favorite nursery rhymes or watch shows, whatever is age appropriate for your child. Just to get them used to that experience. Because, yeah, I mean, you're going to set them up for fail if you're going to turn up with an SSP device, put it on their head, and be like, all right, buddy, let's listen to this music. Yeah.
And we also can be creative with it. Like, so with SSP, there's sort of a balance between what is most optimal and ideal with how we do it, and what is practical and what best supports the process. So part of what's tricky with SSP, it's not just about the music. Listening to the music, for it to be effective, needs to take place in a context of like a positive social condition. So say if a child really struggles to sit still, even for that 10 minutes with the headphones on, if you need to, you can have your child walk around with the headphones on.
Yeah, that's
It's basically, we don't want it to become a power struggle. If a child is forced to go through it when they really are rejecting the experience, it's not going to be effective.
yeah.
And because if it's a power struggle, it does not support the social engagement systems coming on board.
Exactly.
The other thing is, we can't tell what's going on for a child. So say, recently a parent emailed me, when people are using SSP at home, I ask them to stay in touch with me every day if possible, so that I can hear what's going on and say, okay, you know what, maybe slow down, let's take the rest of the day off, or take tomorrow off, or maybe just do 5 minutes rather than half an hour, you know. And
Yeah.
so recently, and it wasn't a child on the spectrum, it was actually I think he was 13 years old. It was a 13-year-old with an auditory processing disorder. And she said, well, he listened to the whole first 50 minutes of the hour, but he didn't want to do the last time. She goes, he was just bored, and I told him just to stay with it. And I said, okay, next time when he wants to stop, just let him stop.
Yeah.
Because we don't know if it's just that he's bored because he's been sitting for so long, or if his nervous system is saying that's enough.
Yeah.
And so it's tricky. And this is where it's really important when you work with an SSP provider to find one who's really good at working with the nervous system and very well informed, because it can be confusing. So another example would be someone who said, oh no, he's had a great day, he's been really silly, but it's okay because he's really having fun. I say, okay, is he a lot more silly than usual? Yeah. Oh yeah. I say, okay, you know what, maybe take tomorrow off, because that silliness, although he's experiencing it as being fun, it could show that his nervous system is more activated. So while it's not a hugely negative experience, I tend to, because I work with adults with trauma who are the highest risk group for having a difficult time, I err way on the side of caution.
Yeah.
And what's nice is that even though I work with the highest risk group, I've actually, knock on wood, I have never yet had someone have an extremely difficult time because I am so cautious. Though, actually, no, that's not true. I've had one person who's had more difficulty than I would have liked, but that's because she wouldn't listen to me when I told her to stop.
And that's tricky, right? Because you're like, oh, well, it's just like listening to music. Because I was testing the headset when I was putting it on my son, and I was like, all right, I just want to check the volume. And this is just like music. But there's a lot more that's happening in the background, which is just coming across as music. So there's another question over here about what are the symptoms of SSP? What worst case scenarios should we be aware of? So I think what the poster is trying to ask about is, what is the best use of SSP? Because SSP doesn't have any symptoms per se, but yes, what it would benefit, in what scenarios would it benefit you? So it would be, I suppose, autism, ADD, ADHD, any history of trauma, I suppose.
I'm wondering if the question is, Miriam, if you can say, is the question with what are the symptoms of SSP? And I notice the next sentence is, what worst case scenarios should we be aware of? Is the question, what are the signs of needing to slow down? Or I'm just confused about the question.
Yeah, can you clarify a little bit, Marianne?
And so I'll go on to the next one, which is also from Miriam, the recommended age range. I have, usually we don't use SSP before the age of 2 or around 2 years-ish. Having said that, there are people who've used it with infants who are having trouble sleeping. It's just kind of a very different approach. We wouldn't do the whole 5 hours, but usually around age 2-ish, might be 2 or 3 might be where we would start. And there's no limit on that. Like adults, there's elderly people who are doing very well doing SSP and having.
And I also wanted to clarify over here that when we go to, I know SSP is something that OTs offer, registered OTs offer. In fact, one of her parents had a pretty terrible experience that she posted about with her OT. I went to a very, very well reputed OT over here, and she actually, you know about this, Carol, and we went back and forth several times because she told me, oh, no, you know what, I've done it with my son twice. Like, she had done it with her son twice, who did not have autism. She said it's totally worth it, but one of the side effects that she warned me about was that the child can be extremely vulnerable in that time, which they call die-off symptoms or something of reaction, which families with biomed experience are familiar with. But it was like about, she explained it like it's like cracking open the shell, but she only explained the negative to me of that process, which really freaked me out because I was like, no, cracking the shell open, being vulnerable, and I don't want my child worse off. But in hindsight, she was right. It totally did crack the shell open, and the real him emerged out. Yeah.
The difficulty is, I remember we had to do a lot of work so I can kind of talk you off the ledge with anxiety.
I was so nervous.
We've kind of heard the worst case scenario. So, oh, sorry, my cat is trying to get involved here. So with SSP, usually when I'm talking to an adult woman about it, what I will ask is, have you ever had PMS? Usually with SSP, there is a possibility, not everyone experiences it, and even not every child on the spectrum, and not even every adult with trauma will experience it. But many people will have phases during which their nervous system will become more activated rather than less. The best response to that is slowing things down, or having connection, affection, and support may help it to settle. But what it can look like usually is kind of a magnification of pre-existing symptoms. So someone who usually responds with anxiety may have more anxiety than usual. Sorry, my cat here.
The window smiling at me.
And say someone who has tends to be angry and aggressive, they may find themselves having more outbursts. Even someone who doesn't normally respond that way, basically people may go more into either fight or flight at some point during the process. Very often what happens is people kind of flip back and forth in between. So I will get emails from someone saying, oh, I'm feeling so calm today. This is the best day I've ever had in so long. Thank you so much for suggesting this. This is wonderful. And then the next day they might think, I'm not sure if this was a good idea, if I should be doing this. Like, it seems like I'm more stressed. And I'm like, okay, just slow down, just slow down. And that's part of where I sometimes have difficulty with people in getting them to listen to me when I tell them to slow down, because they have a moment where they feel so much better and calmer, and then they want more of that, and they think, okay, I want even more, and then they want to do more, when I'm saying no, because I know it doesn't always stay feeling, it's not linear. It's not like, oh, I had a good day and then tomorrow's even better and then the next day is even better. It's not like that. It tends to flip back and forth a little bit for many people. So I see there's a question also, if the child is nonverbal, how do we know if we're progressing or causing further trauma? We watch the nervous system response. And this is where many practitioners who don't understand the nervous system as well, or are very linear thinkers, get kind of confused. So I know of at least 20 practitioners who have signed up to do SSP because of me talking about it on Facebook. I'm kind of like the SSP evangelist now, because I love it so much. But
earned the reputation.
One of my friends, who is a wonderful psychotherapist, she's in California, and she said to me, she goes, I don't get it. It just seems like it's all Wild West. There's no rules. There's all these different approaches. There's no rules. And I say, yes, there is. I said, when you understand the nervous system, the rule is you watch that one person and you tailor that approach to that one specific person. And so you know if the child is progressing based upon how they're feeling. If they're a little bit more activated on a given day, and that could look like say a young child could look like temper tantrums. It could look like being extra silly. It could be look like having lots of extra energy. It could look like being extremely sleepy.
You had a high pitch issue, which I had told you about. That those 5 to 8 days we did SSP, he spoke. My son always speaks in a high pitched tone, in a high pitched voice. It's a touch louder than what you and I would talk in. So if I would be like, I'd calmly be like, "Hey, where are my shoes?" He would be like, "Mommy, where are my shoes?" And calm it down. So he did a bit more of the loud pitched voice, animated a little bit more. In the SSP rounds, we saw that. We saw high energy, and the sleep was not the greatest. But then my son is not a great sleeper anyway.
Yeah. And most people actually sleep better during SSP
I
because
remember you telling me
it
that.
tends to cause some fatigue. But basically, we would watch the child to see how they're responding. They can't tell us with their words, but neither do most adults, to be honest. Like they'll just, well, they might tell me I'm really irritable, or I had this big fight with my boyfriend. I say, okay, and so it also might be turning the volume down. If you're going slowly and your child is still having a really rough time, it's tricky because as an adult or even an older child who can communicate more directly with us, what we look for is the lowest volume at which you can clearly make it out. If the music is louder than what that person needs, they're more likely to have a more agitated response.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's another thing we might tweak. You know what? Try just putting it a notch lower the volume a notch lower next time, and then we'll see what happens. So we really just watch very carefully to see what's going on. Some nervous system activation is to be expected, and it doesn't mean any harm is happening. It just means it's actually kind of exciting because I'm like, awesome, the nervous system's responding. This is what we want. Now let's slow it down so we keep it gentle.
Real life example with my son Ayan as well. So, and I posted about it where I was irritated by him, and he previously just labeled my feeling and be like, "Mom's mad." 2 words. Even though he's capable of more 2 words, it's all that he would express. But now he'd come up to me, look me in the eye, engage me, and be like, "Mom, don't be so mad." He's like assertive. He's expressing himself, and that's a whole lot new. We didn't have that before. So, and we didn't teach him anything. We're obviously completely out of all therapies and interventions and behavioral.
Right, which has made it really easy to see where the improvements are coming from.
And the question is how many rounds are recommended. So I know that it's a 5-day process. We do it over 10 days.
Yeah, so it's 5 hours, and then in between rounds, we wait at least 3 months to allow the different neurological systems to rest. And it's really an individual thing. There are people, I have read, there's one parent that is on the SSP groups a lot, and her little guy has had numerous rounds, and she found she really did need to repeat it every 3 months or so for him to maintain his gains. But that little boy is not only on the spectrum, he has quite severe trauma. He was adopted. So it's kind of a different situation. But usually we just look at, okay, we've had a really big improvement now. And often people are just curious and fascinated by what will happen next. So it's really up to the individual. What usually happens on subsequent rounds is the previous gains become strengthened and also new improvements show up. So we say with SSP is that it is not the end, it's the beginning. So we don't want someone to do SSP and then just do nothing else. SSP shifts the physiological platform very quickly to allow everything else to work better, more quickly, and more efficiently. So we want people to follow it with something. That could be OT, it could be neurofeedback, it could be psychotherapy. There's any number of things someone could follow it with. But ideally, we don't just stop there.
So another great question is, would you recommend parents taking time off to support kids while having the treatment? And actually, we planned it with Carol Ann when we did it. I know it was going to be Ayan's birthday, and it was his 6th birthday. There was a lot of excitement around it. A lot of people were going to turn up, a lot of faces he didn't know. And me and Carol Ann talked about, should we do it before? Should we do it after? And we decided to be on the safe side and do it after, which was a great decision. So should you be taking time off? It depends on your current situation. I suppose we're all under a quarantine situation. So there's not a lot of new changes that are taking place. But definitely do it at a time that's good for you. Right, Carol Ann, was that your advice?
Yeah. And it depends. Like most people don't take time off work to do SSP. Most people don't take their child out of school for it if they are at school. I mean, right now we're not. But generally speaking, we look for a time where there is a little bit more space in case there is a difficult reaction, and both more space for the child and for the parent. So, because basically, if a child is having a rougher time with it, say they're more agitated than usual, or they're a little bit more difficult than usual, we don't want the parent to be so frazzled, because if they're already feeling like they're barely managing themselves, we don't want to throw gasoline on the fire, because It's important for anyone, whether it's their child or their partner or their friend or whoever. It's important that other people be able to hold space for the person doing SSP, because part of how it works is that connection, affection, support.
Yeah. So the best way I can describe that is, I suppose, as well, to the parents, think about it on a personal level. When we are always on guard, we're on guard talking to our therapist, we're on guard talking to our partners, we're on guard talking to our parents, to each other, we're always on guard because we're on this fight and flight mode. We're always planning for, okay, we got to protect ourselves, and we got to, look for things to help our kids go, 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 right? That's kind of where our kids are right now. So what happens, or what's to be expected with SSP, is that being on guard gets removed, right? So now you can expect them to be a bit more vulnerable, maybe a little bit more teary, have some more excess energy, that sort of reaction. So you're not actually looking at turbulence or a rough time per se, but what you're expecting is for them to be a little bit more honest about what they're experiencing. And some of those reactions can be a little bit intense, where you may see more crying happen. But it's you will find that experience going through that with your child is more a bonding experience than anything else, I find.
Yeah, and what's tricky is we don't know ahead of time, because it also may be that you simply find your child is much more calm and much more easygoing, and everything is immediately so much easier. What I tell people, a lot of people, when they do SSP with me, in the end they'll say, that was so much easier than I thought it was going to be.
So any practitioner who's willing to rent out the equipment to you is probably your best bet.
I would ask them a lot of questions. Ask them how
I
they approach it.
On that.
if a practitioner says to you, "Oh, we do it an hour per day, 5 days in a row, and it's really simple, and just go home and do it," run away. You want to hear from someone that this is an individualized approach, that we proceed with caution, and I will be in touch with you every step of the way, holding your hand, to make sure it goes as smoothly and gently as possible. Don't go ahead with someone who is not expressing that they will do that, and who is saying it's kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, because even if a child is not on the spectrum and does not have identified special needs, we still don't know until we get in there. And a lot of the time, even I've had clients with severe trauma who didn't listen. One in particular who misunderstands, she's dissociative, and she forgot all the instructions. She did the whole 5 hours in 5 days, and I was just freaking out thinking, oh no. But by the time I realized, she'd already finished. So I didn't say anything to her, and I just waited to see what would happen. She sailed through it, and she was completely fine and had nothing but improvements. So we don't always know. But you want to be sure that practitioner knows the nervous system really well and will be helping you to understand what to look for, rather than leaving you on your own. I'm about to be up and running with online SSP. There's going to be a new approach where it's digital and it can all be done online. And the beauty of that is you could take as much time as you want.
Wow.
So if somebody needed 3 weeks to do it, there's no rush, because there's no system to return.